All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Blue Sky Coordination Call, preparing for hurricane season. My name is Terry Martin. I am the Chief Geospatial Information Officer here at NAPSG Foundation. We have hosted or supported a version of this Blue Sky call for the last few years, and the goal of these calls is to foster collaboration across the geospatial community and strengthen our collective hurricane preparedness. We do hope to do this today by sharing critical geospatial resources that can support you, making connections with key mission partners, building that network now so that you know who to call, and also ensuring that everyone is aware of coordinated efforts that take place in preparation for and during major disasters. So I just have a couple of logistical items and housekeeping. This is a webinar, which means non-presenters are muted by default. This is necessary due to the number of attendees. However, we do want to hear from you. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A function. Our speakers will be addressing them throughout. So when they're not presenting, that is. So if the Q&A button happens to be grayed out for you, that can be an organizational policy issue, or you may not be logged in with the email or your username to register. But in either case, feel free to just use the chat and we'll do our best to monitor that as well. We do have built-in time at the end that we can use to dig into your questions and comments. So hopefully we'll have plenty of time to go back and read through anything that you've added throughout the webinar. You will notice that there's a QR code on the screen, and the link might be in the chat already. We want to hear from you. What is working, where coordination efforts could potentially improve, and if we could put a mechanism in place, who might be interested in getting notifications when these calls occur. So as always, we always provide the recording and the materials after the webinar. So if you registered, you'll get an email notification. You can always go to our website, to our events page, and when they're posted, you can find them there as well. Okay, so with that, let's talk about the agenda today. After I get us kind of kicked off with a very short intro, we'll have leadership from FEMA's Response Geospatial Office share resources and how their office works with this community during significant events. We will then go through a typical incident geospatial coordination call and get brief outs from folks that we commonly hear from and the resources that they coordinate to make available during an incident. And then to round out our presentation portion, we have our good friend Jeff Brownie from Esri, who loves to give homework with some calls to action. And then, as I mentioned, we built in a little bit of extra time at the end, so we hope to address any questions or comments that arose throughout the webinar today. Okay, so a brief little intro for anyone who may not be familiar with NAPSG Foundation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We have a national network of over 20,000 members, both public safety and GIS practitioners alike, representing all levels of government, the private sector, and academia. We were formed about 20 years ago as an alliance between a number of prominent national associations, some of which you see here, and we've evolved into a formal organization over the course of that time. So our mission is to improve the safety, resilience, and well-being of our communities and to improve government and non-governmental organization responses to chronic and emergent public safety threats and incidents. And we do this through these three pillars: advancing the use of geospatial, fostering adoption of geospatial tools and best practices, bridging the gaps across public safety agencies and disciplines. So if any of that resonates with you, you are in the right space. So practically speaking, how do we do that? Oh, I forgot this is interactive. I'll just do it all at once. Okay, so we do that through a number of areas, largely through defining and promulgating the consistent use of best practices. And we do that through the development of national guidelines and standards. We work to encourage and foster collaboration. We do this through regional exercises and simulations which serve to further validate or for us to update guidance based on those activities. Additionally, through education and training and webinars like this, we aim to build the capacity of the community. And finally, we work to transfer that knowledge and skills to the community. We do this through direct help. Many of you have called or emailed. We do this through more official mechanisms like videos and written tutorials, toolkits, and so on. Okay, so in case you're interested, you might want to know who's with us today. It's not too surprising with the topic that we have quite a bit of GIS practitioners and emergency management folks as well. So when we have these webinars, typically they do vary based on the topic, but we are always excited to see growing numbers in the other disciplines. We all know that we work really closely together during disaster. So if you know of groups that you feel like should be here, may not be, we hope that you'll help us make those connections. All right, so with that, let's get to our speaker portion of the webinar. To get things kicked off, I want to introduce a couple folks from FEMA's Response Geospatial Office. We're really lucky to have the leadership here today. We have Katie Zezima is the branch chief for FEMA's Response Geospatial Office, where she leads the team responsible for response analytics, remote sensing, and geospatial enterprise architecture for FEMA. The RGO supports disaster operations with advanced analytics to inform decision-making. Katie has 17 years of experience in emergency management and geospatial analytics. So thank you, Katie. And real quick, I'll also mention Christina Finch, who will follow up with Katie, who serves as the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Response Geospatial Office Deputy Branch Chief. And throughout her 20 years of experience in emergency management, Christina has worked across a variety of areas, including planning, mitigation, response, and recovery to support data-informed decision-making. She has a specific background and expertise in hurricane planning, mitigation, disaster operations, geospatial technology, socioeconomic vulnerability, and community resilience. So thank you both for joining us. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Katie.
Thanks so much, Terry. I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. I wanted to give an introduction to our team at FEMA. Like Terry said, I'm the chief for the Response Geospatial Office, and we are in the Office of Recovery, Response and Recovery at FEMA headquarters. So we have GIS and technology kind of spread out all throughout FEMA. So you may be familiar with your regional geospatial coordinator. We work with them closely. Here at the RGO, we really focus on supporting that kind of strategic enterprise approach and capabilities at FEMA. So we want to enable our regions and people that are working in the field with all the tools and data that they need. And a lot of that is also available to state and local users. So we want to make sure that and during this call, you know how to get in touch with us, know what's available to you in the community, and how to access that information. So we have a couple of things that are available for the community. One of the things that we do is coordinate remote sensing. We have a variety of different capabilities that we can use depending on the incident and locality. So we'll have someone from our team talk a little bit later to get a deep dive into that. We can also do larger data acquisition. If state, locals, and federal are going to be using data, we want to be just purchasing that once and making sure that we can share it with everybody on the disaster. So we'll touch on that a little bit, and then our geospatial damage assessment. So our team, as soon as we can get our hands on imagery, we start doing damage assessments and provide structural points of damage that indicate the count and level of damage for an incident area, and those can be used in supporting declaration requests. They go directly to our search and rescue teams, and it helps inform the longer recovery efforts for individual and public assistance. So we'll go over a bit about those today. But I think that our most important role here at the RGO is really just facilitating a discussion between stakeholders during an incident. Sure that we're bringing people together, cohort meetings that address, what's being produced, what resources are available to help support the local community, and make sure that we can share any requirements. And we do that through our incident coordination calls. So depending on the region will set up with the state, any local participants, the regional geospatial coordinator, and all of kind of the stakeholders and interested parties, and we'll have a call to discuss what's out there and what's needed, any gaps in information that we can help with. So I think it's a resource for the community that hopefully, will allow us all access to the same type of data and help benefit the response overall. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Deputy Branch Chief, Christina Finch, to give you a little information about our Geospatial Resource Center, and that's our main page where you can find how to get in touch with us, how to access all of the data that's being created at FEMA, and then links to regional and information from other federal agencies as well. So thanks all.
Great, thanks, Katie. I'm looking forward to demonstrating the FEMA Geospatial Resource Center to everyone. And as you can see on the banner on our main page, we have been actively updating and reorganizing the content on this site. So today is the first time we have demoed the new landing page live, but we are going to continue to be making changes and updates. So we would love your feedback and input. So I'll end my demo today with a link to ensure that you can find where to give us more information and feedback as you review the site. So I'm going to do a high-level overview of our landing page and highlight some of the key resources that we think may be beneficial for you as you're just starting to navigate the page, and in particular going into the beginning of our Atlantic hurricane season. So the first thing that you'll notice, as Katie mentioned, is incident support. And one of the things we reorganized was to help elevate to the top of the page information associated with current activations that we may be supporting. So the most recent activation where we hosted incident geospatial coordination calls was Typhoon Sinlaku. This will change as the season continues and we have more events. You'll get updated links for each incident in this initial header bar. And then once an incident closes, it will move to the incident archive. So just to quickly show you the types of content that you'll find on a specific incident page. This is the standing agenda for an incident coordination call that we go over the current situation. We get updates on any modeling or impact or forecast from relevant agencies. We get updates from our FEMA regions as well as our state partners associated with GIS resources that could be valuable. And then the FEMA Response Geospatial Office team, as well as our partners, highlight available imagery and geospatial damage assessments. So if you scroll down through a typical page, you'll see what data was shared in these previous calls. But one of the great things about the NAPSG call today is that they've formatted today's agenda very much like an incident coordination call. So as we move through today's agenda, you'll see some of the data and products that would be focused on individual incidences. So if we come back to the main page, the next subset is really focused on just the amount of geospatial data that is available to you. There are a couple different ways to interact with this information. If you're looking for hazard-specific information associated with hurricane, flooding, tornadoes, etc., you can click through the hazard data. Amelia Pryor from our team is going to be presenting later today, and she is our lead for USA Structures. This is a foundational data set that has building footprints for the entire United States. So you can get that information here under building footprints. Dr. Devin Maloney, also from the RGO team, is going to be presenting today on remote sensing. We've recently updated the remote sensing page to showcase the workflow that we use to identify where we may need remote sensed products, how we task and collect those, and how we coordinate that across the many agency partners that may collect those remote sensing resources. Finally, there are analytics for some of the indices and disaster risk compiled information. You can access all of that data if you go to this data catalog link. So I encourage you to check out the different data sources that are available to you and organized in this menu. The next section leverages some of that same information, but organizes it by our FEMA organization. So today you're hearing from the FEMA Response Geospatial Office, and you will find all of our content in this first tab for response. So as noted in Katie's opening and in my brief review, some of the things you'd expect to find here would be the remote sensing data, the foundational data, our geospatial data assessments, which you'll learn about more today, dashboards, our modeling tools, which Dr. Barker will share with you in today's call. And then I wanted to also highlight, as this call is focused on hurricane season preparedness, that we also have links to other FEMA response programs, including the National Hurricane Program, which manages HURVAC. HURVAC is a free government decision support tool available to help with timing information for both wind and potential damage from storm surge. So if you haven't looked at the timing tools available for HURVAC, I'd encourage you to check that out as well. But finally, if we go back to the main landing page, the last section, well, I would be remiss if I didn't highlight my other partners at FEMA. We do also have more information here for recovery, resilience, UFSSA, and our FEMA regions, if you'd like to check out those in more detail. And I'd like to close by highlighting the Join the Community page. This should be at the bottom of every page, but this page helps you have a resource to be able to find more information, access our team, ask questions, and get access to data based on your roles. So if you review the Join Community page, you'll be able to see more information about what data is available to you based on your role. You can request access to data. We do manage our data access based on FEMA ArcGIS Online groups. So if you are sending us a request for data, please include your name and organization, what data you're requesting, the incident you're supporting, if applicable, and your ArcGIS Online username. If you need more information on ArcGIS Online, your account, please just let us know and we can help you work through that process. And then finally, we encourage everyone to know who your FEMA Regional Geospatial Coordinator is. And so if you aren't aware who your Regional Geospatial Coordinator is, each of these regional icons on the Join the Community page will provide an email link to contact your FEMA regional counterpart. So with that, I will just leave you with the link in the chat to check out the Geospatial Resource Center in your own time. Once again, please feel free to contact us through the Join the Community page. You'll see that our email address is fema-rgo@fema.dhs.gov. I'll put that in the chat as well. But we'd love to hear from you so we can continue to build out this page and this resource to be useful for everyone on blue sky days, sharing information, and also on gray sky days when we're supporting an incident. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Terry.
Thanks so much, Christina. So as Christina mentioned, this call is meant to kind of familiarize you with the calls that typically happen, and so that you know what to expect, but also to get you familiar with the resources and the processes for requesting and accessing them before the chaos of an incident. So as mentioned, we're going to run through a few of the main topics that we cover with speakers from FEMA today. However, it is important to note that during these calls, we have representatives from other federal agencies, NASA, NOAA, USGS, NGA, nonprofit organizations like the Red Cross, and state GIS representatives as well. For sake of time, we could not have them all on. However, you can watch the webinar from last year to hear how they engage with this group during an incident and the resources that they bring to bear. With that, I would like to introduce Whitney Flynn, who will give the first brief. Whitney Flynn is a hydrologist and FEMA liaison officer to the National Weather Service, National Water Center in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. In her role, Whitney strengthens collaboration among FEMA, the National Water Center, and the broader interagency water enterprise to enhance national preparedness, response, recovery, and resilience to water-related hazards. She translates complex hydrologic science and emerging forecast products into actionable information for FEMA leadership and emergency management partners, while also delivering critical training on new and evolving National Water Center tools and services. And that is exactly why we have Whitney and folks in her role get us kicked off daily when we start these incident coordination calls, as she translates the complex forecast models for us and ensures that we know where to find the geospatial products needed to support operational decision making. So thanks so much for joining us, Whitney. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Whitney Flynn here, FEMA liaison to the National Water Center in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I wanted to provide a quick overview and update on some key Water Center products and services, including some decision support tools and flood inundation mapping services, which are soon expanding to nearly 100% of the nation in just a few months. So we'll jump into it. First, just a quick overview of the Water Center itself. It is a product of a NOAA-led partnership that provides a new generation of water information and services to the nation. That includes things like the National Water Model, continental scale flood inundation mapping, a new cloud-based National Water Prediction Service, or NWIPS. It's located on the campus of the University of Alabama here in Tuscaloosa. And it is one of the primary locations under the Weather Service's Office of Water Prediction, which comprises all 13 river forecast centers. By now, all of you are probably familiar with NWIPS, or the National Water Prediction Service, but this was unveiled back in 2024 as the replacement to the Legacy Advanced Hydrologic Prediction Service, or AHAPS. Same general design here as AHAPS, with a national map showing the observed and forecast river levels, but it now comes with more dynamic hydrographs with more look-back time. It also features historical precipitation, as well as probabilistic river forecasts and new and existing inundation maps. And coming soon, we'll also be unveiling more features like a national map for probabilistic river forecast guidance, like the Hydrologic Ensemble Forecasting Service, or HEFS, as well as more granular options when picking your observed or look back precipitation, like what you're seeing here. A lot of the newer services within NWIPS are largely driven by the National Water Model, which has been a major game changer in the world of water prediction. It connects the 4,000 or so official river forecast points to a hydrofabric of over 3 million waterway miles. And I want to be really clear here, the water model doesn't replace the official river forecast. It serves to complement the official forecast and help complete that hydro picture, where we've traditionally never had forecast hydro guidance. But the water model guidance comes with a ton more data. The streams and catchments amount to more than 700 times the spatial density of the traditional river forecasts that have been provided by the river forecast centers for decades. But 3 million waterway miles is a lot to look at. It's great that we have all this guidance now, but the question then becomes, how do we get anything actionable out of it? So the Water Center has spent the past several years distilling the water model forecast down into a suite of river observations and forecast services based on stream flow, looking at time of arrival of peak flow, or when the river's going to crest, and flooding thresholds, probability of rapid onset flooding, and several other services. And these are all publicly available in a couple of different spots, including NWIPS. They have a data and services catalog, also via the Weather Service GIS viewer. For the sake of time, I can't go through each of these, but definitely check out the public handbook. It provides a description and methodology and update time for each of those services, and that's available on the Water Center's operations website. So there's really good info there. I do want to dive a bit into the flood inundation mapping, or FIM. You may hear me say FIM or flood inundation mapping interchangeably, since there are some really big updates coming soon. This has been part of a multi-year effort from the National Weather Service since 2016, so about a decade, to provide real-time neighborhood level inundation extent for forecast for the entire country. And this coming fall will be their biggest milestone yet. Now, these are experimental tools, meaning that they're still in a phase of development. And to note some key limitations at the top, this is primarily focused on freshwater riverine flooding, so out of bank river flooding. This isn't considering fluvial or urban flooding, and it's not considering coastal flooding, not yet. Those capabilities are still in development. The experimental layers here are also extent only. The depth component is still in development. But the motivation behind all of this starts with that hydrograph that you see on the left. There's some really good information there, and sometimes there are impact statements like, oh, did my slides go? Can you still see them?
Yes.
Okay. Sometimes there are impact statements that go alongside the hydrograph where you have historical information based on local knowledge. But what does that water actually look like on a map? And how many structures are impacted or how many people are impacted? And it's important to note that this is just one singular point. What about impacts further downstream, right? Or what does that look like 4 or 5 days ahead of time? So we know where to pre-stage resources or where the hardest hit areas may be. Imagine you have the information on the right 24 hours or more in advance. That's the goal here with flood and inundation maps, is to inform response operations by allowing for more timely and accurate flood prediction. These are dynamic flood maps, so they provide maximum inundation extent forecasts that look out up to 5 days, and they're going to update regularly, either hourly or every 6 hours, depending on the configuration. But there are also static pre-canned flood maps available. So answering what if questions, like what if the river reached major flood stage or record flood stage. So those are good for exercise purposes. These provide libraries at different flood levels with 1 foot intervals in between. You can also find those on NWIPS as well. This shows the ongoing FEM implementation rollout map. This is where the areas either are or will be publicly available soon. So you can see where the Weather Service started rolling them out back in 2023 with the areas in green. So areas in Texas and then the Mid-Atlantic. And then in 2024, the areas in blue, this included parts of the Southeast and into the Ohio Valley, the Pacific Northwest, and even Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands. And then last year, expanded to parts of the plains, the West Coast, the Southeast, and even Hawaii and parts of Alaska. And so here we are in 2026, we're awaiting the final rollout for the remainder of the country. This will not include territories such as Guam and American Samoa, but they are in development. And so you can kind of see the deliberateness of this rollout initially away from the coast. And this is largely due to the fact that for right now, the FEM doesn't consider coastal flooding. It only considers inland processes or inland flooding. But over the next year, that coastal capability will be ready. And that total water level FEM will be available, and that'll be using STOFs and P-Surge from the Hurricane Center when available. So the all-important question, where can we access these flood maps? There's a couple of different access points depending on whether you're just wanting to view them or you want to bring them into your own mapping environment for geoprocessing. If you want to just view it, I would just start with the National Water Prediction Service, or NWIPS. That's the water.noaa.gov/FEM. And then you can just zoom in to view areas of ongoing or forecast flooding, and then just change your FEM configuration. You can find lots of resources and one-pagers on the flood inundation mapping from the NWIPS website. You can also check out weather.gov/OWP/operations, and I will put that link in the chat. Most of us on this call are a little more GIS savvy, so this might be your preferred option. I like the NWS GIS viewer. There is a /water version of this viewer, and that just provides all the data from the Weather Service around water. So things like precipitation or stream flow or flooding. And this includes some of the experimental GIS services from the Water Center, including FEM and the National Water Model products like high water arrival time or peak flow arrival time, and several others. And so you can visualize the data here, but you can also pull the data source links from here. Just click on the little paper clips right next to the layer name, and then you can bring up the map server. Okay. In addition to the FEM services, the Water Center is also continuing to expand its suite of decision support products. Many of these are routine and update a couple times a day, and others are issued as needed during times of increased flood risk or flash flood risk. The first is this Flood Hazard Outlook, or FHO. This is a very high-level infographic and speaks to all freshwater flood hazards over the next 7 days. and it uses 3 impact categories. You've got limited, considerable, and catastrophic. So pretty similar to those impact-based warning tags that you see with flash flood warnings. This product is issued twice a day at 7 a.m. and around 3 p.m. Central Time. And during tropical cyclones, a tropical version of this product will also be issued concurrently with the national product, also twice a day. This is available as a static graphic and a GIS service, so you can bring it into your own maps. The next is a national hydrologic discussion. Some of you may be getting snippets of this product from me via email, but you can always find this text product online via NWIPS. Again, here, a very high-level hydrometeorological discussion talks about any and all potential hydrologic or flood threats over the next 10 days anywhere across the country. And this product is issued alongside the FHO. So twice a day, 7 a.m., 3 p.m. Central Time. The next is the area hydrologic discussion. This is issued as needed for the potential for flash flooding or rapid onset flooding. This product usually goes alongside the WPC and mesoscale precipitation discussion. And I'll be the first one to admit these can get a little hydro-technical, a little science savvy, but there are some pretty good nuggets in there. And that's what some of those products look like from the FHO. They also provide state-based and FEMA region-based versions of the flood hazard outlook. This is an example flood hazard outlook from the Water Center that was issued during the height of the flooding that occurred last December in Western Washington. There are those 3 flood impact levels. You've got limited, which is just your minimal base level flash flooding or your minor river flooding. Considerable, which would be your more significant flash flooding and minor to major river flooding. And catastrophic, which would be much, more exceedingly rare widespread flash flooding. Your flash flood emergencies would be more common here. Major river flooding cases, floods of record are more common within a catastrophic area. This product is always available on the Water Center operations website, but when they begin issuing considerable and catastrophic outlooks, so the dark blue or the pink shaded areas, I will begin sending those out to affected regions with some information on what's driving those significant flooding conditions. Okay, I think I am way over time, but please feel free to reach out to me anytime should you need any information or training from the National Water Center. Thanks again.
Thank you, Whitney. You did great on time, particularly with how much you have to cover. So thank you. I don't know if we could keep track of all of the resources that you all provide without you, especially the new and the experimental. So thank you so much for that. Your situation brief rolls really well into the analytics and modeling brief that we typically get next from Adam Barker, who we will have brief. So Adam joined FEMA in 2017, primarily supporting disasters in the field. He moved to headquarters in 2019 as a member of the Response Geospatial Office and has been there since, currently serving as the analytics team lead. Prior to FEMA, Adam's interests were in geology, and he has a PhD in geological sciences from the University of Washington. Thanks, Adam, for joining us. I will turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. And I do want to start by just thanking Whitney and the National Water Center, who have been really important partners over the last few years. I'm really here to touch on analytics. So this is more or less a transition into an end user perspective of the aforementioned hazard data. Okay, so I just want to make sure this advances to the next slide.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, stripping away all content, the headquarters analytics portion of an incident coordination call can be summarized into a few standard points. The first is really, what is the NRCC posture? And it's important to present this because, first of all, a lot of the NRCC folks are using headless email accounts, and so it's not always it's not always obvious who is the person behind the seat. Moreover, the logistics of the NRCC are important because we often will shift between day and night operations, and it's important to know when we will be looking for information. And then In general, we will discuss our methods, and really those methods and approaches are what I'm going to talk about most today, and then try to present some basic results. During the pre-incident phase, our focus will be on finding and vetting the best hazard data. So we'll often bring in some of the SMEs like Whitney or the Army Corps to talk about their various models. And we need those hazard data to help us estimate impacts. And then with those impacts, we will try to provide some sort of context or form a narrative. Likewise, post-incident, our focus will shift to, what were the impacts of the incident. So in particular, we look at those lifeline impacts and again, try to find the best lifeline data, and then obviously characterize what the hazards actually were. And most of the data that we present, data and results, I should say, that we present will be available in the Geospatial Resource Center, which Christina mentioned before. I do want to note, though, that a lot of the published results that we serve out in headquarters analytics will be published using the FEMA MAC account. So it's the FEMA_MAC, which is our AGOL handle. But again, most of that will be served on the GRC. So that's kind of a simple laundry list of our actions. I find it a bit boring. So with that in mind, I'd like to spend some time talking about our approaches and really the decisions we make as analysts, rather than focusing on the products. So first and foremost, as an analyst at headquarters, it's really important to know what the regions are producing. And we're going to see some of the regional products soon from Region 6. Likewise, during Hurricane Milton, we leveraged a lot of the Region 4 dashboards and depended on those for some of the high-level senior leader briefings that we gave. And so it's not just a matter of avoiding duplication. It's really trying to understand, where some of that great information is coming from and how we can use it to our own benefit. We also grapple with challenges associated with instantaneous snapshots of impacts. And we exist in a world where dynamic data is available, but oftentimes much of the products we make are meant to are PDF products, and so they really represent just a snapshot in time. And then, like the regions, we also leverage dashboards as much as we can, but I will say that they do have limitations. And importantly, dashboards are more than just the content that they provide. And this is especially true in the NRCC, where our lifeline dashboards are really a window into what content both the NRCC staff and our senior leaders, that is, are looking at. And then finally, the discussion is just as important as the results. Okay, so let's talk about our analytic approach by starting with some general truisms. Hurricanes, severe storms, even earthquakes all have a multitude of hazards, and each one of those hazard types demands its own attention, which is why these calls are extremely important and help shine a light on sources of hazard data. A common issue we face is that predictive models like the National Water Model flood extent is relatively comprehensive. And normally we would think that's a good thing, but one of the challenges we face is that when we do exposure analysis on these, on a flood model like the water model, it's a instantaneous result of of essentially an entire impact area. But we all know that those observations take time to come in, and so we have this general whiplash where we see large numbers showing the predicted hazards and impacts of those hazards for the entire area. But the reality is those observations will come in slowly, and so it's hard for senior leaders to sometimes grapple with those with that change in numbers. And then the models can be wrong, and that's okay. And we certainly accept that risk and combat it through things like repeat analysis and trying to characterize uncertainty in any products we produce. But we do need to shift to observations as quickly as possible. I guess I should say my primary job in the NRCC and my primary job as an analyst is to estimate impacts. So I think it's important to explore what is an impact, and it's more than just a number. An impact is how a hazard affects both the buildings and populations, and includes some information about how the hazard is mitigated. That said, much of our analysis much of what we do is not really a true impact analysis, but rather an exposure analysis, which is a simplification. And I don't think that's a bad approach. Each one of the components in that equation have their own uncertainties, and it's hard to quantify how those uncertainties propagate into the final result. But generally, when we do things like exposure analysis, we exclude the capacity term. We just don't have good data there, so it's hard to know things like first floor elevation and if the structure has any sort of mitigative measures. And then we apply that hazard to one of the two variables that are left, so either the built environment or the population. And we can improve that analysis by adding increasing levels of complexity. You might hear things like consequence models, which are bringing in fragility curves, but even just having things like the hazard severity, or rather than just talking about population, what are the impacted populations and so on. But the hazard variable is the most critical, as it is the most critical because the building data and the population data we can think of as static data sets, and that hazard information is specific to an incident, and it also changes in time. I generally have a good idea of what hazard data I'll be using at any given point, but the reality is not as simple as this graphic depicts. And unfortunately, the idea that there are authoritative data sets just really isn't true. But a coordination call like this is a good opportunity to not only discuss and share hazard data, but it also level sets on how the data should be used, and including what its limitations are and so on. Important questions to consider, and this is mostly because they need to be included in the description or in the results descriptions or in some sort of metadata, includes that does the hazard have some sort of information about the severity, or is all the exposure treated equally? And for the static data, what is the source of the building data? And I think this is one of those overlooked points, but in the analysis, are you looking at just the points, or are you looking at the polygons? And this doesn't really seem like a big deal, but if we go back to the first point, if the hazard only does not include information about the severity, then each one of those points or polygons is treated equally, and so those numbers can change or vary between that. And then, finally, thinking about the intended use cases is extremely important. A model based on a likely scenario will give you a completely different result than one based on the worst case scenario. So with this slide, I thought I'd talk about some of the common challenges, but I think I'll recast it and talk about how we can combat these challenges. So the first is lack of hazard information or incomplete building footprint data. This is a common issue, and certainly things like USA structures really help us. But the reality is these are problems that we need to fix pre-incident. So building relationships and blue sky time like now are extremely important. The second is with respect to having multiple hazard models that show different results, and that's depicted in the picture on the right. I don't mind this. I think this should be looked at as a range of potential results with maybe one more likely option, and that option could be explored during a coordination call by the SMEs. And then the third is undefined use cases or poor handling of published results. Again, this is something that can be figured out by talking to your end users. And the poor handling of published results is during an incident we generate a tremendous amount of data. If you could do things like overwrite services rather than generating a new service each time, I think that helps. And then overinterpretation or usage beyond the resolution of the data. So I think, again, we like numbers, but so often a lot of, especially the pre-incident exposure analysis that we do, is really to set an order of magnitude or what is the baseline, and then it's most important to track how things changed in time, and then understand why those things changed. Okay, so. And we got to this point. So finally, what can you expect from headquarters analytics? Well, we've created a variety of automated alerts and processes that one can find on our Tempo site, and that was also linked in the GRC. That site is available to anyone with a FEMA AGOL account. I invite you to explore the link that's posted there, and I'll put it in the chat shortly. During incidents, and this is probably most relevant to the group here, we generate, again, a tremendous amount of custom data. So that's at multiple types. So looking at building level exposure, so taking a hazard and applying it to a building data set, or trying to do something more complex. And so one of the unique tools that we create in the RGO is called the post output, and what that is a prioritized representation of hazards. And so it is more of a true impact, where it combines information about how the hazard impacts both the built environment and the populations, and then ranks it based on population vulnerability. And so it's designed to not just show every impact, rather it shows where those impacts are greatest to the built environment and where those populations are most vulnerable. And then one of the things we try to do in the RGO analytics team group is to repeat analysis as much as we can. It's not good enough just to provide a data set one day that shows numbers. We have to do it the next day and see how things are changing and why. And I'll end by thanking everyone that participates in these calls, especially the SMEs that help dumb things down for us. Disasters happen far too often, and it's important for the communication to come together whenever we see those risks become consequences. So I'll turn it back to you, Terry. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Adam. I know one of the key takeaways from the coordination calls are your updates on the models that are available and your level of the level of confidence in them. So I appreciate you kind of sharing all that today, because I don't know how many folks attending today have been able to attend those calls in the past, and how helpful it is to hear what's available, how they're performing, how they've improved as the incident progresses. It's all extremely valuable, I think, to folks who are kind of head down and just looking for geospatial resources that are available and may not have time to dig into what they should be using during any given incident. So thank you for that. So during, after we have those briefs on the forecasts and the analytical products, we typically go to our FEMA region that has been impacted and their states. So today, FEMA Region 6 has joined us to share some of the products that they produce and to share how they coordinate with and support their states. From Region 6, we have William Holloway, the Region Response GIS lead. His experience in GIS ranges from county level, GIS Rockingham County, Virginia, to the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, where he deployed to Afghanistan for 6 months, and then to the Marine Corps intelligence activity before coming to FEMA in 2021. We also have Malik Ruchi, who is an emergency management specialist in the FEMA Region 6 Recovery Division and primarily functions as GIS and data analyst. He has been with FEMA since 2024, and prior to that worked for the state of Oklahoma in the Recovery Programs Division at the Oklahoma Department of Emergency Management. Thank you both for joining us. I know how incredibly busy your region is, so over to you.
Thanks, Terry. I'm going to turn my camera off now that I've seen everybody. Just just wanted to give you a brief overview of how we're getting ready for the hurricane season here. We typically have an incident journal. It's something that's changed formats and styles as we continue to learn and improve. We adjust it based on our experience and feedback. So feedback is really important, and we look forward to that. We start this incident journal with the question, what's the story that we're trying to tell? And for FEMA Region 6, we have the states of Texas, Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And just because there may be a hurricane in the Gulf does not necessarily mean that everything stops in New Mexico or Oklahoma. So we have to take that into consideration. The intent of our dashboard, and hopefully we can get it up here, is to orient our leadership here on what the federal response is here locally in our region. Thank you. Can everybody see that now?
Yes.
Excellent. So across the top, you can see there's different tabs that will orient and answer kind of the questions that we're looking to answer. I've got some test data in. We had a hurricane workshop yesterday, so I pre-populated that with some test data that we could walk through a scenario in. We'll clear that out, of course, but we'll have the event ID will be a primary indicator for us where we can filter down based on our WebEOC event ID. And then we'll post on here based on the data that we're getting and in a real-time and live format, what resources are being moved. Sometimes that's pre-staging in the event of a notice event like a hurricane, or just staging after the incident has already occurred. And tracking that so our leadership knows what resources we have available, where they're going, and also if any of our personnel are within a threat area as well. So this is interactive. Malik, if you'll click down on the event ID at the bottom, if you'll just click on like the Hurricane Workshop 2026 LA H-96, and you'll see that it'll filter out the ones that are there. So and then if you can even just click a couple of the other ones, then you can see on the left-hand side, it populates with the data and information that's there at those specific incidents. Next, we have, if you'll click on the top link, our virtual situation room. That's where we can orient everybody that's in the Regional Response Coordination Center and the RCC what's going on. It's got times of meetings, it's got resources of documents that are going on during the event. So it's a one-stop shop for all of our federal partners and our state partners as well as we coordinate with them through the disaster. And then we get into some more specific kind of questions that we're trying to answer. One of those is power. What's the power currently doing? So Malik, you can click on there. Thanks. We're often monitoring where the power is going out. An indicator for us on, like what our lifeline situation is for the people in our region. Next, we have an incident map. This has just got a slew of information and data on here so that our planners and those that are responding can really kind of see what resources are available, where we already know things are, where we can put things. It helps kind of help provide that broader context to our leadership here within the region as well. During an event, we'll have our weather situation, and now we try to compile all of the different weather layers that are available to us as far as watches and warnings, where it's flooding, precipitation forecasts, weather or wind and tornadoes, kind of all those things that our leadership are going to ask about. Where the heat is bad, that's particularly important here in Texas and Louisiana, because sometimes once the hurricane's gone through the area, people don't have power for a while, and then now they've got these heat warnings, which can be particularly dangerous. So helping identify what the threats are as we continue to work through the incident are important. And then also we point to our, our state partners here with our road conditions. So we just, instead of trying to host everything on one map, we prefer to send people to the source in a lot of cases. And then same with our Lifeline dashboards from headquarters. We're really grateful for the work that they do. We don't want to duplicate anything that they're working on, so we can point our leadership and those that are responding to this into our headquarters Lifeline dashboards. The added benefit of using Experience Builder to, especially in this format, is during specific events, we can quickly add new pages depending on how we're responding to those events. I could easily see us having something like wind speed, the current weather forecast for where the cone of the hurricane is forecast, all that kind of information in one area. And then also as our leadership are finding and identifying, hey, as they adjust, hey, we've got new questions, we can add those easily to our incident journal here. So I will turn the time over to my much better colleague at all of this, Malik Roshdi. Thank you.
All right, hi guys. Hopefully you guys can see my screen. If not, just let me know. But my name is Malik Roshdi. I am with the FEMA Region 6 Recovery Operations Branch as a data analyst and GIS specialist. I want to talk to you guys today briefly about kind of some of the products that we would get requested for hurricane season and also just overall flooding in general. So one of the main questions that we always get is who was impacted and when, and we've always had a difficult time kind of answering that question. And so back to Adam's point about some of the data analysis that can be done and some of the forecast modeling and impact analysis. From a regional perspective, when we get questions from leadership, we're more so looking at a more flatter perspective, right? A more flatter kind of analysis that we do. And so one of the things that we got for the Louisiana floods was, hey, I need to know what was the highest rainfall in a given parish. Now that's great, but one of the main situations that you might find in that is that just because we say, highest rainfall in a random area, county, Canadian county, for example, was 10 inches, that doesn't mean that it actually impacted anybody within the county. It can fall out in random area of nowhere and there's no general impact. So one of the things that we did during this event was take the quantitative precipitation estimate TIFF layer, the raster layer, and then convert that over and then overlay that onto hex 3 grids using the H3 Python package, and then decide to geo-enrich that by identifying where the highest precipitation fell in what county, and then also alongside that, what city and where that city was closest to. So lots of colors on the map. However, in a table format, for example, Washington Parish, where they had 9 inches of rainfall throughout the incident period as the max value, if you will, the nearest city was Mount Herman. And then given that distance, 5.53 miles away is where that rainfall occurrence was. So we're actually taking the opportunity to go through and identify cities that we could potentially, call up the local emergency manager or call up our state partners and say, hey, did this actually occur? And if so, what damages are you seeing or what type of flooding impacts are you seeing? Another type of kind of concept that we're working through is looking at the flood inundation modeling that the team does at the National Water Center alongside working with Whitney to take those same kind of hex grids and geo-enriching those with the population numbers to look at what might be the potential population that is impacted as a result of the FIM's inundation extent, right? We know that not all of the areas in the inundation extent are going to flood, but what is the big boom scenario based off of what we're seeing? And so using the H3 grids and using population data, we're able to basically outline areas in the total population count, as well as using the USA structure layer to get some of that same overall kind of data that we get from RGO through some of their analysis. And then lastly, on kind of just the hex grid part, and I'm going to show you guys a few different examples of how we share data across the board with our state partners. One of the biggest things that we always see during flash flood warnings or during tornado warnings or during severe thunderstorm warnings are things that are highly impacting our region, but they're more polygon based, is, hey, I need to know how many people were impacted or how many structures were in the polygon. And that doesn't generally give you a good indicator as to what the actual scenario is based off of just a classic warning weather polygon. And so one of the things that we've taken the time to do, and this is a real-time layer that updates based off of the latest Region 6 or any alert that's in Region 6, is take those same hex grids that are geo-enriched with the population numbers, the residential structures, and the USA structures, and actually take those polygons and make them actionable. So we can see where the greatest population that might be impacted by a severe thunderstorm warning and some of the hazards that are within that warning, or a flash flood emergency and some of the different hazards that are within that flash flood emergency, such as flooding or river flooding, whatever it may be, taking that and being able to provide leadership back with some type of analytical product to say, hey, based off of what is in the polygon itself, here is the potential structures that may be impacted, taking the inundation layer and combining that to say, here are the potential structures that may be impacted, basically taking our grids and saying, hey, here are the residential structures that may be impacted through this, here's the total population, here are these gridded areas that may have some type of damage, not a guarantee, but they may be impacted by floodwaters. And so this is an example of a flash flood emergency that was just issued a couple of days ago for Atoka County. They had a lot of rainfall. It's hard to just take a flash flood warning or a polygon warning and just give it to leadership and overlay the population data without providing at least some more context, because then we're over alerting and we're overestimating the true impact versus what actually may be happening. And so this is just an easier way for us to narrow down where the impacted area is and what some of the extent may be to residential structures and also the population in general. I'll stop sharing here really quick. Actually, I have 2 more slides, sorry. And so what that looks like on our side of the house is we keep power outage data at a historical level and also real time through feature layers that we keep on ArcGIS Online. Bill showed you guys that within the incident viewer that he has and also his response pages, the power outage tracker. That's a live running layer that we keep. It updates every 15 minutes. We also go back and we look at the historical power outage data and also keep an archive of that as a feature layer too. One of the biggest questions that we get, especially after tornado events or hurricanes, is how long were parishes or how long were counties without power and for what timeline. And so keeping an archive of that, we're able to see those trends and use that to kind of paint the picture, at least for the process of declarations, like, hey, this county was without power for blank amount of time, and we had this many customers without power as well, based off of the power outage data that we have. And so on our end, we have an internal page, we call it our gray sky version of Pulse. And so we use this to kind of help determine leadership decision making across the board. And then alongside that, anything that we do within here, we try to really make sure that we keep the ability to share with our SLTT partners. And so this is an example of our PDA tracker on the back side of the house, but we keep a PDA feature service layer that could be shared with our partners if needed, or mapped out on a map that we could then create a layout for and export as a PDF, and leadership can have that to share with their partners for whatever state it may be or whoever they need to share with. So product-wise, through AGOL, you'll notice that for Region 6, one of the things that we do is also spin up an incident page as well as an incident group with our state partners. And so during the severe winter storm, we stood up this incident page for DR 4900. And what this is doing is just really complementing some of the products that we get from RGO and also some of the things that we coordinate with RGO, showcasing them at a more regional level. And then some of the products that we keep for our other FEMA staff and counterparts within public assistance here at Region, or the actual disaster staff at the JFO. But this incident page is meant to kind of coordinate those activities alongside our internal FEMA partners and also our SLTT partners as well. And then beyond that, we also highlight some of that same information through just different various product requests. This is an example of those grids again, looking at a flash flood warning right now up in Oklahoma. And so this is telling us, you know, hey, this is based off of the population number for those grids, where the highest impacted areas were, so that if we needed to, we can focus our efforts somewhere else versus the whole polygon itself. And then when it comes back to a historical analysis piece, one of the things that is always asked about, especially for, in this case, gave an example of boil water advisories on this dashboard. Hey, what was the historical impact for boil water advisories? Or what was the historical impact for our overall outages? And this happens just to be recording real-time outages. But overall, the main intent of what we do is to collect data that we can then provide our leadership with, that they can also provide the SLTT partner leadership with, to make informed decisions about a disaster declaration request, or even through response operations here at the ROCC here at Region 6 when it's activated. And then lastly, I'll show you guys just briefly kind of like, again, our recovery pulse side of the house here. Again, we really look at some of the data that RGO provides to provide a synopsis to our leadership as to what's going on across the board. One of the things that we really enjoy looking at is some of the tempo data and also canopy as well. And so overall, I will say that we work hand in hand with our state partners. As events come up, we're in constant coordination with them, constant contact. This last event, we are working with our GIS partners up in Louisiana for PDA operations to start the virtual validation process the same weekend that the flooding happened. So looking towards the communication and partnerships to increase or to decrease the time it takes to get PDAs done and see what other resources we need to offer, such as imagery or GSGA operations. So with that, I will turn it back over to Terry.
Awesome. Thank you both. The regional and state briefs are really one of the most critical parts of the calls. I cannot overstate how important it is that this call, which is hosted by FEMA headquarters, have the collective time to hear what is going on locally, what challenges and data gaps exist, and also reduce duplication of effort. A lot of times multiple groups have the same questions and are trying to track down these answers. And I've witnessed how having all these levels of government on has resulted in finding those answers much more quickly. It's just a great opportunity to come together and solve those problems. And I'm sure everyone is familiar with the products being created by groups like FEMA Region 6. So thank you both. Now, having said that, one of the other key topics is remote sensing. In fact, when other briefouts discontinue as the incident progresses, the remote sensing topic almost always continues to the bitter end, and briefouts can even get longer throughout. So with that, I want to welcome Devin Maloney, who is the National Remote Sensing Coordinator for the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the one that leads the remote sensing brief and efforts. In her role, she leads the acquisition of aerial, drone, and satellite imagery to support rapid disaster response. Devin received her Bachelor of Science in Geography from the University of St. Andrews, Scotland, and a PhD in Geography and Environment from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Thank you, Devin, for joining us, and I will hand it over to you.
Hey everyone, and thanks Terry so much for the introduction. I'm Devin Maloney. I'm the National Remote Sensing Coordinator here at the RGO. Today I want to walk you through the different kinds of imagery resources and remote sensing data that are available during in actual response to emergency responders via the RGO, and discuss how we can coordinate those resources and imagery collections during incidents. Is everyone seeing my screens as it's progressing?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So today I'll just briefly cover the different kinds of remote sensing data we can task and acquire here at the RGO. I'll talk about their different properties, their applications, and the trade-offs and timelines and resolutions. I'll go from kind of the lowest resolution to the highest resolution and cover optical satellites, radar satellite derived data, aerial imagery, and UAS. Each imagery source is useful for different applications depending on its resolution and latency and triggers for acquisition. So how do you, as emergency managers and responders, request imagery collection or actual access? For imagery resources during response, you should always reach out to your FEMA Regional Geospatial Coordinator, who can help connect you with the FEMA imagery resources. For the major incidents, as we've been talking about throughout this call, we often stand up the geospatial coordination calls, where we discuss ongoing imagery acquisition, deconflict collection efforts, and discuss and prioritize areas of interest. This coordination, both with the regional geospatial coordinators and at the coordination calls, are aimed at reducing the duplication of effort for maximizing the distribution of the imagery to all of the relevant stakeholders. And as we highlighted at the very beginning of this call, I do also want to highlight the Geospatial Resource Center, which is a great resource for both the blue sky and the incident-specific resources. During the major incidents, like when we stand up those geospatial coordination calls, we compile a list of all of our geospatial data resources and available imagery resources to this site. And it also serves as an archive of resources for past major incidents. You can always come back and refer to the resources on this page. And I've got here just a screenshot of the kind of imagery resources that we compiled during a recent activation for the Kona low flooding in Hawaii this spring. And as you can see, we have a variety of image types, including satellite imagery, aerial imagery, flyover videos from both drones and aerial assets and UAV or drone imagery. So with that background, we can kind of briefly cover the different kinds of imagery resources that FEMA might be able to offer during a incident, and we can start with optical satellite imagery. Satellite imagery varies in resolution and coverage area, so it covers a huge range of types of data. It can vary in coverage area and temporal resolution, so in other words, just how often it can capture the same area. There are two main types of satellite imagery we can use. Fine resolution data and open source coarse resolution data. For both types, one of the big challenges for both that coarse and high resolution optical data is the need for cloud-free conditions, which is really tough for a lot of different kinds of hazards like hurricanes and floods. So those, of course, often both coincide with clouds. So satellites are also limited by their orbits and how often they might capture a specific place, their temporal resolution. So that first kind, the open source coarse resolution satellites, these collect large swaths of the Earth every few days at low resolution. They're great for tracking broad trends like wide area or lingering floods, but they aren't very useful sometimes for detailed response work. This kind of imagery is the kind of imagery that scientific agencies like NASA and NOAA collect and make available openly online. So open source satellites might be useful for some kind of broad situational awareness and kind of hazard extent, but is not necessarily detailed enough for seeing details like damages to homes or infrastructure. The second type of satellite optical imagery that we work with is high-resolution commercial satellite imagery, which the RGO can task directly through the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And this is much more useful for response applications that want to look specifically at detailed things like structure or infrastructure damage. Although it's commercial, there's no cost to FEMA due to the NGA contract, but we do have to actively task the collection, so it's not done passively. There is some latency. It can usually take 1 to 3 days from request to delivery. That's, of course, if there's ideal weather conditions like cloud-free conditions. So it's not always as timely as we want, but it certainly still can be valuable. During a response, this imagery is not publicly shareable, but it is licensed to be shared with our SLTT government partners, and we can do that through those AGOL sharing groups. With the high-resolution satellite imagery, you can usually see homes and infrastructure and identify severe, highly visible damage. For example, if a structure was totally destroyed by a wildfire. But for more subtle kinds of damage, like wind impacts or kind of minor or affected types of damage, we usually need higher resolution data in the form of aerial imagery for those really detailed assessments. The RGO can also purchase another kind of satellite data called synthetic aperture radar or satellite-derived analytical products. Unlike optical satellites, SAR satellites can detect water and other surfaces through clouds, smoke, and at night, which is of course really useful in response situations. Some commercial SAR vendors offer specific analytical products for flood and wildfire applications, which can be really useful. Flood Insight products, for example, provide depth rasters of estimated flood depth, as well as per structure min-max mean flood depth exposure at the structural level. And these are based on observed data rather than modeled. The Wildfire Insights, for example, would classify structures as destroyed or not destroyed. And since the underlying data is that SAR data, it can, again, collect at night or through clouds or through smoke. And so these vendors can provide a more persistent monitoring as the incident unfolds. One of the most common and highly requested types of imagery is aerial imagery, so imagery taken from a plane, because it is higher resolution and we can really customize the actual flight areas. The RGO works with a mix of commercial vendors and federal partners like NOAA and the Civil Air Patrol to acquire aerial imagery during a response. The big advantage for this type of imagery is the resolution. The aerial resolution is much higher than satellite imagery, and the pixels are usually less than 15 centimeters, but sometimes as fine resolution as 10 to 5 centimeter resolution. And at that resolution, we can conduct high resolution structure by structure damage assessments. So you can tell things even like individual shingles on a roof being missing. We can also request oblique collection. So that's when the pictures are taken at a side-looking angle rather than straight down, which can be really useful for understanding things like floodwater depth against buildings. The turnaround time for aerial imagery collection is usually between 24 and 72 hours within CONUS, of course, depending on weather and the size of the area that we're looking to collect. Those timelines are a little bit longer outside of CONUS, which is a vulnerability, but we still obtain data regularly from places like Guam, Mariana Islands, Alaska, and Hawaii. Seems like all of our incidents in the past 6 months have been outside of CONUS, so it is certainly still something we support. The Caribbean is usually a little bit easier for us because it is accessible for aerial assets in Florida. So with the relatively quick turnaround, the customizable AOIs and the high resolution aerial imagery can be extremely useful for response operation, especially when we collect it in a timely manner. And like I mentioned, the RGO collaborates with a variety of federal and commercial partners to acquire aerial imagery. Some of our common federal partners are NOAA's Remote Sensing Division, which is a great partner, especially for hurricane response in the Southeast. The Civil Air Patrol is another regular partner as they have small planes scattered across the country, so they have really good coverage. But we aren't limited just to NOAA and CAP, and we can collaborate with partners depending on what resources are available where. During a response, for example, in Alaska last year, we collaborated with the Fish and Wildlife Service, which was a new one because they had a small plane in the area and local knowledge and expertise. So we can leverage all these different federal partners via mission assignments managed by the RGO. And the RGO also has a national contract mechanism, so we can also work with commercial vendors. Our main commercial aerial partner is NearMap, and my whole next slide is specifically about our contract with them. But we're not limited to NearMap either. We can contract with other vendors, especially outside of CONUS, to fill in the gaps of federal and NearMap coverage. Last year, FEMA acquired a subscription with NearMap for aerial imagery. Unfortunately, their coverage is limited within the continental US, but for most of our disasters within the lower 48, we work really closely with them for rapid post-impact collection. Importantly for all of you, our federal partners, all of our partners, state, local, tribal, territorial, FEMA's NearMap contract allows us to share post-disaster imagery with state, local, tribal, territorial partners for 30 days after collection in the event of disaster-related collection. And we share that via a WMS API, and then we'll just turn off access after 30 days. And again, the FEMA regional geospatial coordinators would be your primary point of contact for accessing that imagery when it's available. And we, again, are communicating all of that through the incident coordination calls as well. And finally, UAVs. These offer the highest resolution imagery and are the most flexible flight paths to cover small areas. UAVs can collect both obliques and orthomosaics, just like aerial imagery and also live video. Unlike aerial imagery, UAVs can fly lower, so the resolution is even higher. At the moment, FEMA doesn't have any of its own UAV assets, but the RGO can coordinate with federal, state, and local partners to collect UAV imagery. A lot of this coordination, again, happens at those geospatial coordination calls where we discuss what assets are collecting where and talk about sharing and distributing resources. UAV imagery can obviously be incredibly valuable due to the high resolution and the ability to target really specific locations, but it relies on having those trained pilots in the right place with the right equipment. So it's often a really good resource, for example, if we're looking to target a specific area. So if you're interested in a specific piece of infrastructure, that can be a really great way to target it. But aerial imagery from a plane, for example, would be more appropriate if we were trying, for example, to capture like the whole coastline of North Carolina. And I'm working pretty closely with a couple of different interagency partners who have drone fleets so that we can mission assign them through the RGO during responses. And I hope that this will become a capability we can increasingly leverage going forward for that really targeted high resolution imagery. So hopefully that's a good kind of overview of the kinds of imagery that the RGO can acquire during an incident and how we go about the coordination and development of collection plans that are appropriate for the hazard and the particular incident. So if you have any questions, please email the FEMA RGO mailbox to reach our whole team or me. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Devin. I have a feeling folks are going to come back to this recording and the slides to review some of your content. You covered a lot, and I know it's because you're incredibly busy during incidents, both coordinating the acquisition of imagery and coordinating with all the stakeholders to ensure, as you said, we mitigate duplicating imagery collections. I also appreciate your expertise on the types of imagery and its usefulness for different applications, which is extremely helpful for us non-remote sensing experts. But I do hope that folks will take a look at the Geospatial Resource Center to see the types of imagery collected in the past, to start thinking how you can build these imagery resources into your workflows. So speaking of imagery, leverage, and workflows, next we'll have a presentation on FEMA's geospatial damage assessments. For that, I would like to introduce Amelia Pryor, who is an emergency management specialist in the FEMA Response Geospatial Office, where she supports and advances enterprise-wide geospatial data and systems. As a deputy lead for geospatial damage assessments, she helps deliver timely and actionable data that provides situational awareness and decision support during disaster response. Over to you, Amelia.
And I will put on my video for the introduction as well. So hello everyone, my name's Amelia Pryor. I'm with the Response Geospatial Office here at FEMA. I support the Geospatial Damage Assessment product along with my colleague Chris Hill. So today I will give an overview of what geospatial damage assessments are, how to access the data, and some examples of how they've been utilized in recent activations. All right. Okay, so what is a geospatial damage assessment? Geospatial damage assessments, or GDAs, provide situational awareness, support critical decision making, help determine assistance needs, and aid search and rescue operations. So GDAs indicate the level of damage to different types of structures, including residential, commercial, and government buildings. GDAs may also incorporate non-structural damage, such as impacted roads and bridges, down power lines, and down trees. So GDAs rely on visual comparison of pre-incident imagery and post-incident imagery. So as you can see on this slide here, on the left, we can see our pre-incident imagery, and on the right, we have our post-incident imagery. And this shows an example for our most recent GDA activation for the tornado outbreak in Indiana just earlier this month. So GDAs, again, visual comparison of pre and post incident imagery, and they are a product that comes from the RGO to indicate the initial size and scope of the disaster. So GDAs feed into the disaster declaration process, and they can also be utilized during the transition from response to recovery as inputs for both individual and public assistance. GDAs can also be shared with our emergency management partners, and they are shareable. I'll get into the products that we can share a little bit later in the presentation, but they're available to share with all our partners. All right. So one key goal of GDAs is to capture the size and scope of the disaster within 72 hours of an incident. So this is really early on after the disaster strikes, and we're often working with very limited information in those early days. So how do we enable this goal? First, we have a trained workforce, our trained analysts, which are made up of both FEMA staff and volunteers who are trained to conduct GDAs. And I'll cover that a bit more on the next slide. GDAs also require a lot of different data sources. The first is baseline data, namely USA structures, building footprint data. So you can see on this slide here, we have our USA structure polygons in the white outline there. Analysts will place a damage assessment on a USA structure polygon, and that actually gives us a really nice attribute of occupancy class associated with the damage assessment. Other data sets that go into the process include hazard-specific information. For example, going back to our tornado example, we'll utilize canopy tornado track data in order to really figure out where to search, especially in the first couple days. And then perhaps most importantly, GDAs require data showing the post-incident damage. I'll get into this a little bit later in the presentation, but we use open source media. We also use aerial and satellite imagery, as well as search and rescue observations. This quality imagery is really important in our process. Also wanted to mention that we can incorporate local damage assessment surveys, and our platform is very flexible to ingest and assess multiple different data sources. And all of these data sources come together within an application. You can see an example of our damage assessment application on the screen here. We incorporate all of our imagery, our data sources, our assessment data, and we have analysts who are working simultaneously to conduct these assessments. Okay, a little bit more about the people behind GDAs. So GDAs have a structured training program. This training is really essential to ensure the assessments are consistent and quality. So this training covers how to mark structures by FEMA's defined damage categories, which are destroyed, major damage, minor damage, affected, and no visible. We also train our analysts on how to classify occupancy class, such as whether a structure is residential, commercial, government, etc. So for GDAs, we have a really great surge capacity force. We've been working a lot to ramp up our efforts before hurricane season. Currently, we have over 250 volunteers from primarily from the Civil Air Patrol and the Coast Guard Auxiliary. These partnerships are really critical in scaling our efforts as a force multiplier, so we can really ramp up our efforts for a large-scale event. We also train multiple FEMA programs from various FEMA regions to support GDAs as well. Now diving into the GDA process a bit more, the first data we typically assess are really open source media, as well as search and rescue observations. So in early days after a disaster, weather conditions can make collecting high resolution imagery quite difficult. So until then, we rely on other sources. So our team will look through posts on Facebook, YouTube, some independent drone operators who upload their data to YouTube. And our team then needs to figure out where these images were captured and essentially geolocate on the map. We like to call it a game of Where's Waldo. GDAs will also leverage photomappers information, and that can be pulled right into our application. Also, ground-based teams from search and rescue will upload their observations into the SARCOP platform. We also pull that information into GDAs. And at the same time, GDA information is shared with the search and rescue teams. They're up to date on any additional areas, impacted areas that our team may have found. So now on to the imagery collection. So Devin just covered a lot of the great information that we may collect for imagery. This imagery is really key to ramping up the GDA efforts. Once we have that imagery available and processed into the application, we can really go structure by structure, grid by grid, and systematically assess large areas quite quickly. Devin explained that there are many different kinds of imagery. One differentiating factor might be like a nadir imagery, so like a bird's eye view versus oblique, where you can really see that angle of a building, which can be really key for capturing flood depth, for example. The scope of the imagery collection might range from incident to incident, but for GDAs, we really work with what we can get at a given time, and that might really evolve over the course of the incident here. Okay, so how does this all come together? GDAs are presented in a reporting dashboard, which indicates the total estimated structural damage by category. You can see these 4 categories here: destroyed, major, minor, and affected. This dashboard can also be filtered by the incident name, especially if it's multi-state. You can also filter by county and even the occupancy class. So if you're interested in residential versus commercial damage assessments, you're also able to see that in the dashboard. The imagery, the underlying imagery might also be displayed depending on licensing restrictions, but that's a really nice feature because you can really zoom in and easily see which areas were identified with the most damage, or even click on a point and you might be able to see a screenshot showing the damage there. So government partners can access this dashboard through the FEMA HQ Incident Resources Group on ArcGIS Online. So we can add external organizations through that are able to provide their own ArcGIS Online account. And if your organization does not use AGUL, we can facilitate a hub community account to get access. So this dashboard is updated in near real time. So as analysts are working, you'll be able to see the totals tick up in near real time, which is great. And then after the incident, the dashboard or the data are archived. So the dashboard reflects what activation is happening at present. There's also an underlying feature service that's available for anyone who's interested to pull the data within their own web applications. As we plan for hurricane season, I wanted to speak to the response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. This was our largest activation to date. It included over 200 analysts participating over the course of 28 days, multiple organizations including FEMA, NGA, Civil Air Patrol, Coast Guard, and private contractors. Over these 28 days, over 258,000 damage assessment points were marked, in addition to 100,000 trees down. Many different infrastructure types were also captured. For example, bridges. You can see a ton of down trees in this example, and it all coming together on the dashboard here. Yeah, I think this is a great example of how GDAs can really ramp up and provide situational awareness over a prolonged period of time, making sure everyone has the latest up-to-date data. And yeah, I think it's a great success story there. Okay, so that is all I have today. Thank you for your time. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to Chris Hill or myself, Amelia Pryor. And you can also email the RGO shared mailbox as well if you have any questions. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. I don't know if it's quite as obvious the small army that you and Chris lead to accomplish these geospatial damage assessments, but it is really quite impressive. So I appreciate you sharing that today to ensure that folks know this resource is available and how to gain access prior to an incident. I think it's really important that GIS practitioners and emergency managers are aware of this resource and are prepared should a hazardous event occur in their jurisdiction to build it into their workflows. So thank you for that. Last but certainly not least, most of you likely know Jeff Branny with Esri, who always graciously agrees to go last and wrap up these types of calls with some key next steps that we think will help prepare you and your agencies for future incidents. Jeff currently serves as lead solution engineer on the public safety team for emergency management and disaster response. He's responsible for working closely with the community to discover, develop, and promote best practices in the use of ArcGIS to support the emergency management mission. Jeff also helps lead our Esri Disaster Response Program, which provides GIS support to organizations during disasters and crises. He has been with Esri since 2000 and started as a consultant in the professional services group. With that, I will turn it over to you, Jeff.
Great. Well, thank you, Terry, and thanks everyone for joining today. Good afternoon. So not as much homework, but just kind of continuation of some of the resources that are available to you and we want to make you aware of. So a couple of community resources we wanted to emphasize and kind of some public service announcements. First of all, SARCOP, so Orlando and Paul and team couldn't be on today. I think they're dealing with other disasters today. But if you haven't heard of SARCOP or their Search and Rescue Common Operating Platform, it's basically the system of record for all the federal teams and most of the state teams kind of across the country. I think a good mix of both kind of top down and bottom up, working together with, technology, field tools like quick capture, bringing it all together and dashboards and the like, and being able to share that broadly, across the community. And like you say, supporting other things like Amelia just talked about with the geospatial kind of, damage assessment. So wanted to raise your level of awareness of that. There's some links in these slides, and I think Terry and team will make these available, to everyone kind of after the fact, so you can go through and click through a lot of the resources that are available to you. One of the big kind of foot-stop things we want to talk about from a SARCOP perspective is the availability of the data. So the great work that the teams do, in the field, all the first responders, the firefighters and the like that are using, quick capture and the tools in the field to collect this data, that can be made available to the emergency management folks, the disaster response community, to help out in a variety of different ways. One of which is to help expedite your PDA process. So your disaster declaration process, this can help jumpstart it. It's not a substitute or a replacement of that, but at least it can give you a sense of where's the greatest amount of damage, where you might need to kind of focus your efforts, first. And in many cases, we've seen that as a great way to help folks kind of get started and kind of really expedite the recovery funding, from a damage assessment process, leveraging, SARCOP. There's a lot of, information and resources that are shared, on the slide, including kind of a new, email inbox that kind of catches everything, so you don't have to know, who exactly to email and the like. The team has done, put a tremendous amount of work into creating videos and having kind of a training library of all their kind of specific workflows and tools kind of along the way. But again, the big message, especially for state and local emergency management agencies, is this can be a resource for you to help, really kind of jumpstart your damage assessment work. The other thing that they wanted to share with you and have, kind of refresh all of you is, here's some kind of frequently asked questions that we often hear from folks from a SARCOP perspective, right? Do you want to get access? Well, here's how you do that. Do you have a SAR team in your jurisdiction, but you're not sure if they're using SARCOP? Well, why don't you reach out and try and get some folks kind of connected. So they really do a good job of trying to coordinate with teams, even when events are happening, and kind of meet folks where they're at, to be able to really synthesize and bring all of this, information, together. They also do a good job of training each year and having folks kind of go through and do a refresher on the methods and accessing the tools, and have a great sandbox that you all can kind of play with and use to get familiar with the operation of the tools and some of the data, that's provided. So that's one key thing that we wanted to cover from kind of a public service announcement perspective in this section. Another thing that we wanted to call out is, PhotoMappers. So PhotoMappers is a joint effort between NAPSG, GIS Corps, and others that, started, many years ago, almost, 10 years ago. And the key message that we wanted to share with this group is oftentimes FEMA or others will activate, PhotoMappers, but it doesn't have to be, just FEMA that activates PhotoMappers. Any government agency, state, local, can request, an activation, and that's a big thing that we wanted to communicate and kind of foot stomp on the slide. Matter of fact, last year during Hurricane Melissa, PhotoMappers was activated on behalf of the government of Jamaica. So even, in a different country during a government shutdown, PhotoMappers, really stepped up. And some of the key things about PhotoMappers is, from my perspective, they do a great job of providing vetted situational awareness information, especially at the early phases, of a disaster. They're almost kind of like detectives that are able to see, images on social media and other open source locations, geolocate that, on the map, and be able to provide that. And they can even do a good job of sifting through what's real and what's, fake or kind of AI, generated. So just a big shout out to all the photo mapper volunteers for all the great work that they do to provide this, valuable resource, for the community. And again, some links for you there at the bottom to reference, later on. So that's kind of the second kind of community thing that we wanted to share. A couple of updates that we wanted to share from the Esri side is that, as you heard today, there's a tremendous wealth of resources across the community, and that continues to grow and expand, year over year. The near access to the near map data and the ISI data and so much more is, a great wealth to the disaster response community. But some of the key things to get access to all of this is being in the right ArcGIS Online groups to be able to access that. And so in a perfect world, we'd like for that to be able to happen kind of before an event happens, when skies are blue, like today. But oftentimes we scramble to kind of do that on the fly. And so one resource that I wanted to share with you is a technique and a process that, Peyton Jarnigan and others on the Esri Emergency Management, Services side have kind of pulled together. So there's a nice blog post on their ASAP process, the automated sign up and approval process. And basically what it is, it's a survey 123 form that have people submit their information, including their contact info, as well as, most importantly, their ArcGIS Online username, and provides a streamlined way to get folks into the appropriate ArcGIS Online groups through a human-in-the-loop kind of vetting, process. So the links there, as well as kind of the QR code. So the kind of the call to action for you is to think about, one, am I in the right ArcGIS Online groups for my FEMA region or the RGO to be able to facilitate all of this information sharing? And two, just have you think about, as a provider of information, how can you, facilitate and speed up access into these ArcGIS Online groups so people can access the wealth of information that's been, shared today, and much more. One of the new things that we've done this year is we, oftentimes from the Esri side, your account managers or other folks on the Esri side will want to be kind of proactive in sharing resources with the communities and really kind of the impacted users. And over the years, we've, had these, big emails that have all these resources. And so this year we've kind of, with the help of John Petter and others, have tried to translate that into a set of story maps. So these are, resources that are really kind of for early stage, access to information that talk about, the capabilities and community resources and data sets. So we've got them for each of the major kind of disaster types, especially early on. And really the kind of goal here is, especially for folks that may not deal with disasters all the time, here's kind of the shortcut of resources and data that may help you get up to speed quickly. So if you're impacted by a disaster, so some Esri folks may reach out to you with some of this information. Like I said, there'll be a series of community apps that we'll share, like the FEMA Geospatial Resource Center and others, a set of capabilities. Some of the key things that we see from our Esri solution team include the Emergency Management Operations Solution, which provides situational awareness and information sharing, as well as the Damage Assessment Solution, which is based on the FEMA standard for individual assistance and public assistance, as well as kind of what are the standing kind of common data layers or live feeds, both from the Esri Living Atlas, NOAA, USGS, and others that are kind of key, as a part of that process. So again, that's something that is new this year that we'll be looking to to share with you all during disasters. The other thing, and Terry mentioned this, is the Esri Disaster Response Program. So really kind of think of this as a way, if you've got gaps in your response, capabilities or needs, your capabilities are exceeded, these are ways that Esri can help you. And there's really kind of four main ways with which we can help folks. First is additional Esri software. Hey, I need more named users, or hey, I need a site scan license or drone to map, which we've seen a lot of lately, because we see more and more kind of drone teams flying and collected data after an event. What we call workflow implementation is the second thing. If you need help standing up a capability like situational awareness or damage assessment quickly, teams can help you with that. Connecting you with kind of the community of data that's out there. And a lot of what you've heard about on today's call is really what we reference and try and synthesize, for our users as we're supporting them. And finally, technical support, kind of getting you to the front of the line if you're from a tech support perspective, if you're impacted, impacted, by a disaster and getting you the help you need. And so to just initiate a request, just go to esri.com/disaster, and there's a request assistance button in the top right. But as we kind of close out, the session today, and I realize that you've heard a lot of, information, I kind of want to switch gears a bit and get a bit more philosophical, perhaps. And, obviously with this kind of AI-assisted graphic is just my visual representation of what you heard and saw on the call today and what has played out for years in the GIS disaster response community. The community, working together across federal, state, local, tribal, territorial, private sector, nonprofits, academic, and much more, really kind of, working together. And for me, like many of you, we may struggle to find hope these days. And, one area where I find hope is in you. It is in you all, the people of the disaster response community. And I think, it's really refreshing to see the great impact that this, community, makes and in, the things that you see down there at the bottom. First and foremost, improving the outcomes for survivors, getting that declaration, faster, getting that recovery funding, flowing, help us understand where the areas of greatest, needs are, just a tremendous wealth of information that was shared today about supporting better decision making at many different levels of government. And part of that's established by this enhanced information sharing, the people, the resources, the mechanisms through the coordination calls, the hub pages, the Geospatial Resource Center, the work that you all do, and much more. And a lot of that's through like reducing the duplication of effort. Oh, this person's flying here. We don't need to worry about that. We can share information. And that's just one example of many of how all of this, kind of comes together. Also, learning from each other. I learned a tremendous amount, today just on this call alone about some of the great, things that are being done across the community. And, we all learn from each other, and we sincerely appreciate that. And I think that helps us be more productive, quickly and helping to kind of make an impact. And at the end of the day, kind of being, better prepared. So, a lot of us, have a why of why we do this and why we work together to make a difference. And I think that's a source of strength for us. And especially when days are long, stakes are high and things are certainly kind of challenging. So again, just kind of a visual way to try and bring all of this, together. A lot of just a concept of what you saw for the past 2 hours and what you've seen for the past, couple of years and frankly decades, and how all of this has evolved and come together more, in a much bigger way. It's really refreshing to see that the growth kind of across the community, the increase in the number of people that are there. So I realize we've covered a lot of ground today, so I'll end it there. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for the inspiration that you provide, and thank you for the impact that you make. Best of luck in the upcoming disaster seasons, and know that across the community that we're here for you. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Terry.
Amazing. Thank you, Jeff. Now you all know why we asked Jeff to close us out, right? He's our geospatial Ted Lasso. So always appreciate your words of wisdom. I wanted to again share the QR code for folks who want to who missed it and want to fill in the questionnaire on if you're interested. Should we put in place something like Jeff showed with the how to get notified when a coordination call is happening, how to ensure you are in the right groups when that does happen. So please feel free to continue to fill out that survey as you think of things. If you have any last alibis, you can certainly add them to the chat now. I was tracking the questions and the comments in both the Q&A and the chat, and our speakers just did a tremendous job of answering and addressing everything that I could tell. What we will do is compile the Q&A and the chat, and that will be included in the materials and the recording as we go through. If there was anything that wasn't addressed, we'll make sure that we reach out to our speakers and ask them to answer those for you. So those will all be packaged up nice and neat with the recording and the slides. I do want to take a moment to thank our tremendous speakers. Clearly, they're all experts in their field, and they're also very clearly passionate about their work. It takes a lot of work during blue skies to be as prepared as they are during gray skies. So appreciate you all being here today to also just kind of improve our collective preparedness by understanding the geospatial resources that are available, thinking about how you can incorporate them during gray skies. I know how busy you all are, and it's really hard to take new information and build it into a workflow in the middle of a disaster. You don't maybe trust it, you don't know where how it can fit. So by being here today, I think everyone took a really big step in becoming familiar with what is available to them. So thank you for that. I'm just monitoring chat. I don't know if someone wants to answer the UAV question regarding GDAs.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to. Long story short is FEMA has limitations on what kind of drones we can specifically task, like through a mission assignment or specifically purchase, but we can certainly ingest imagery that is collected by other partners in coordination. So for example, if you know, a member of the public were to collect imagery just as a storm chaser and post it on YouTube, regardless of whether or not it was an approved UAV, we can certainly ingest that as well if local emergency managers are using their own UAVs on their own authorities, we can ingest that data. We just can't specifically pay for it. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you for that question. I know questions related to UAVs are coming fast and furious recently. So I will say that this doesn't have to be where the conversation ends. If you have additional questions that come up, you can add them to the survey link that I included, where we ask at the end if there are things that this community can potentially support you better to mitigate, some of the challenges that you're encountering. You can also reach out to us and we will do our best to address those, and then also forward them on to the experts on this call if that's what we need to do to answer them. So with that, I think we can wrap it up for today. Please stay connected with everyone that you heard from today. Make sure you know your regional geospatial coordinators. If you have issues and don't know who those key people are, please reach out to us. We're happy to connect you. And last but not least, again, thank you to our tremendous speakers and FEMA's Response Geospatial Office for the incredible work they do and for how intensive they are with making sure that this community closely coordinates and just overall improving our collective geospatial capacity. So thank you all again. We hope to see you at the next webinar, everyone, and we'll see you then.